If you've ever watched any news segment on Serbia, you've probably heard this name, Aleksandar Vučić. The president of Serbia, a man virtually every person in Serbia and the region has a strong opinion on, and either hates with a fiery passion or loves him like he's a family member of their own. But why is that, and who is Aleksandar Vučić? Well, stick around and find out. Born on the 5th of March 1970 in Belgrade, the then capital of Yugoslavia, Vučić was born to a middle-class Serbian family. Both his father and mother were college graduates with fulfilling careers, with his father working as an economist and his mother as a journalist. For the majority of his early days, Vučić's childhood was no different than that of the majority of other kids of his age. He had friends, a happy and relatively well-off family, and great grades in both elementary and high school. Vučić had such high grades, it could be argued he excelled in school, because of which his teachers nominated him to compete in school history competitions. Young Aleksandar did extremely well in these competitions that soon enough he found himself competing against other schools in the city, and later on against schools from the entire country, where he'd go on to win several awards. But when he wasn't competing in history, Vučić was then competing in chess, as the timeless game of strategy was another one of his great passions. Just like in school and history, Vučić too excelled in chess, quickly climbing the ranks in the competitive world of the sport in Yugoslavia, and receiving the title of first place pioneer of chess in Belgrade, the equivalent of #1 junior league chess player in the capital. However, by the time he graduated elementary school and high school and was entering college, Vučić gained another passion: politics. As such, in 1988 he enrolled into the Belgrade University of Law, where he continued his academic success, receiving the title of one of the best students of his generation, alongside receiving a scholarship to go and study in Brighton in the UK, where he would become fluent in English. But while in public he was a bright young man and exemplary student, in private he had a darker side. Like many European young men, Vučić became fond of football from a young age. He loved the sport so much that he ditched prom to attend a football game. However, as he was coming of age, he took this passion of his to the extreme by joining the Red Star, one of Serbia's most famous football teams as Ultras. As the political situation in Yugoslavia was spiraling out of control, nationalism started to take a strong grip amongst the youth of the country. The ideology found plenty of breeding ground amongst football fans, who already felt fiery emotions for their clubs. But now, this passion was taken to the next level. As such, clashes between ultras became common in Yugoslavia, with numerous fights breaking out between football clubs and being fired further by ethnic tensions. One of the most famous incidents happened in Zagreb in May of 1990. When ultras from Zagreb's Dynamo and Belgrade's Red Star started a mass fight against one another before the match even began, which ended up in several getting injured and the police having to use violent intervention. Amongst the participating brawlers was also 20-year-old Vučić, who would later on boast about his participation in this event further down his political career. Following Red Stars and Dynamo's clash, Yugoslavia would 1 year later enter a complicated series of civil wars, where many of the former republics would attempt to secede from the Federation, while at the same time their Serbian minorities would attempt to secede from them. One of the main driving factors behind this conflict was nationalism and the idea of establishing ethno-states, because of which radical nationalist far-right parties sprung up throughout the ex-republics. In Serbia, one of these parties came to be known as the Serbian Radical Party, and over the course of the war, the party gained a great chunk of popularity and influence within the nation's political system, as national extremism only continued to spiral out of control. The Serbian radicals were led by the infamous Serbian nationalist and acquitted war criminal Vojislav Šešelj, and as the main idea was the creation of a greater Serbia, the radicals were strong supporters of the war and even created a volunteer paramilitary force who would fight in it to achieve their goals. Led by Šešelj, the radical paramilitary unit would go on to commit various war crimes and ethnic cleansing in both Croatia and Bosnia, with many party members joining their ranks. As the Yugoslav war spread from Croatia to Bosnia, Vučić, enthralled by the muse of nationalism, volunteered to join one such paramilitary unit. Between the years of 1992 and 1993, Aleksandar was stationed in the hills of Sarajevo and tasked in helping with the siege of the city. However, as Vučić was extremely educated and fluent in English, his commanders saw greater potential in him than just as another foot soldier. Because of this, after 40 days or so, Vučić was restationed in Pale, a small town in Republika Srpska, Bosnia, where he became tasked with creating and organizing English news segments for Kanal S, Republika Srpska's national TV station, as well as conducting and producing a variety of interviews with figures involved in the war. In retrospect, however, many would argue that Kanal S's segments were lacking in journalistic integrity and were more akin to government propaganda. Just like in his academic career, Vučić excelled in his job as well and quickly got the attention of many higher-ups for his work. Because of which, after coming back to Serbia at the age of 23, Vučić immediately after enlisted into the Serbian Radical Party, and in the same year of him joining the party, he became an elected member of parliament. More impressively, he became the youngest member of parliament in the country's history at the time. During his time in parliament, he continued spreading pro-war rhetoric of the radicals, continuously arguing for Serbia to take stronger and more radical action in Bosnia. Once he stated that for every Serb killed, they, the Serbs, should kill 100 Muslims, and then see if the West would dare intervene with Bosnian Serbs in their war effort. Vučić's statement was arguably referencing the Nazi policy during World War II, where the Germans killed 100 Serbs for every dead German. Later down the line of his political career, when questioned about his bombshell of a statement, he would claim that it was taken out of context and never provided further explanation nor apologized for it. Along with Šešelj, the two would take excursions to the front to meet with the troops and hold propaganda speeches for the press out there. His work within the party was significantly recognized that in just 2 years of joining he would climb up high in the ranks, becoming the party's general secretary. Now, fighting a war is difficult and a complicated task. To successfully fight a war, you need many things: good weapons, efficient supply chains, manpower, superior technology, but most importantly, you need information. The person who controls information and its flow controls the battlefield. A simple task in theory, but a difficult one in execution. But every so often you will get the perfect man for the job. And that man was none other than Vučić. As the situation in Bosnia and Croatia calmed down and the war in Kosovo was just starting to heat up, Vučić climbed up the political ladder yet again by being appointed as the Minister of Information. By this point, Yugoslavia, or what was left of it, was severely spiraling down the path of authoritarianism and radicalism. The country had essentially lost 2 wars, one after another, its economy was in shambles, international sanctions were through the roof, all the while another war was brewing on the horizon. To say the condition the country was in was delicate would be a gross understatement. Very easily, the situation could have spiraled out of control as the Serbian people became increasingly more unhappy. And nothing was more dangerous at this point than one bad word against the government, as any public criticism could easily snowball and lead to the complete collapse of the regime. As such, Vučić was tasked with the crucial task of keeping this from coming to fruition by controlling the country's media. To achieve this, Aleksandar signed arguably one of Serbia's historically most draconian laws, the law on public access to information. With the passing of this law, Serbia's media landscape changed overnight. Under Vučić, all media published in Serbia became regulated and censored beyond belief. First and foremost, Serbian publishing and media houses were forbidden from publishing and retransmitting foreign media. Secondly, publications were forced to exclusively publish information that was in accordance with the Milosevic regime's official narrative. Any media that deviated from the official narrative was punished severely monetarily, with the owning media house having to pay incredibly high fees in under 24 hours. Failure to do so would result in the government seizing their property and the media house virtually ceasing to exist. However, as the situation in Kosovo worsened, the already bad media freedom in Serbia did as well. Soon enough, many independent journalists became peak government targets. Those who oppose or question the government narrative were proclaimed as traitors and foreign agents. As the first NATO bombs were dropping over Belgrade, media regulation and censorship went into overdrive. Journalists across the country started to be harassed and intimidated by government functionaries, while many also found themselves behind bars and beaten by the police. Foreign journalists en masse started to be expelled from the country, while publishing houses had to have their articles read and approved by the Ministry of Information daily. Yet others weren't so lucky. Slavko Ćuruvija was one of the most influential and well-known journalists at the time. Ćuruvija was the owner of several publishing and media houses, which during the 90s remained independent and more often than not challenged the official government narrative. Đurović himself focused on investigating the war in Kosovo and publishing the crimes committed against Albanian civilians by the Serbian forces. Despite the government trying to censor, shut down his media houses, and suppress Đurović by labeling him as a traitor and foreign agent, the journalist continued with his work. However, this only brought more scrutiny upon him. Vučić in particular declared a fatwa against Đurović by having the national media denounce him, publish smear articles and TV programs demonizing him, while also personally stating that eventually he will seek his revenge against him. A couple of days after that statement, Đurović was found dead in the streets of Belgrade with several gun wounds in his back and head. As information would become declassified down the line, it would turn out that he and his wife were followed by 27 government security agents during the war. In 2021, 3 secret agents were found guilty for the murder of Đurović. However, 3 years later, they were acquitted by the Serbian Court of Appeals. At the same time, Vučić claimed that Đurović was murdered by the Montenegrin mafia, but he forbade this information to be published by the media at the time and failed to provide any sources to support his claims. Under external and international pressure, Serbia was forced to back off from its military aspirations in Kosovo, and the country imploded in on itself, being devoured by flames of revolution as the people took to the street and seized the parliament for themselves. As the country was undergoing fundamental change with the establishment of a new regime, Vučić, alongside many of the ministers from the previous government, resigned. With his resignation, he would then return back to the parliament as an MP, where a new beginning in his political career would await. With the deposition of Milosevic and the winning of the DOS coalition, the Serbian Radical Party was relegated to being a part of the opposition. In the early days of the new government and the new millennium, Vučić continued pushing for far-right radical dogma by performing a variety of stunts in the parliament in opposition to expatriating war criminals to The Hague to stand trial for their actions in the Yugoslav wars. Outside of parliament, he led and engaged in numerous demonstrations in support of Ratko Mladić and Radovan Karadžić, the generals behind the siege of Sarajevo and the Srebrenica genocide. Inside the parliament, he told a sign that would say, "This parliament is a safe space for Karadžić." Alongside this, one particular stunt he kept performing was printing out a street sign that would say Ratko Mladić Street and put them over existing street signs throughout Belgrade. Despite obtaining sizable popularity, the majority of the country stayed clear of the Radical Party, and practically every other party in the country refused to enter any sort of coalition with them, which left the radicals isolated and incapable of winning any meaningful elections. In this period, Vučić mainly focused on campaigning and trying to get elected as the mayor of Belgrade. However, despite his best efforts, that goal was always out of reach as the radicals increasingly started to get shunned from the Serbian political sphere. Serbia, trying to distance itself from its not-so-recent past and right-wing extremism, was gradually trying to embrace liberalism and rejoin the European community it had been estranged from in the 90s. With the shift of public opinion, the Serbian Radical Party started engaging more and more in infighting, with many members starting to question the party's beliefs and methods. The turning point in the party's history was when in 2008, the second-in-command in the party, Tomislav Nikolić, and known then as an extreme Eurosceptic, voted in favor of joining the EU and the parliament. This sent shivers down the radicals' spine, as this move was completely and utterly unexpected. Furthermore, after the vote in favor of joining the EU, Nikolić, poaching several other party members, split from the party and founded an MP club known as Napred Serbia, aka Forward Serbia. Days after Nikolić left the radicals, Vučić also did an unprecedented move and resigned as the party's general secretary. A move virtually no one could have predicted, as Šešelj for the longest of time was seen as Vučić's political mentor, and some would argue the forger of his political career. Many radicals saw Vučić's resignation as nothing less than a backstab, Šešelj first and foremost. As such, according to some, including the ex-president of Serbia, Boris Tadić, Šešelj was planning to seek his revenge from both of them with plans of liquidation, because of which the state had to provide protection to the two politicians. Nevertheless, together, the two would go on to create a new party that would come to be known as Srpska napredna stranka, the Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, with Nikolić as the president and Vučić as the VP. In 2011, the party would go on an aggressive campaign calling for new elections, organizing mass events, rallies, and Nikolić even engaging in a hunger strike. The government at the time eventually submitted and announced new presidential, parliamentary, and local elections. The first round of elections was tough, with the newly formed party SNS and the ruling party DS going neck and neck. However, in the second round, Nikolić and Vučić falsely accused DS of committing election fraud by allegedly finding 3,000 ballots in the trash. By the end of the day, Nikolić was proclaimed the victor and the new president of Serbia, winning by a margin of 2.32%. With the ascension of Nikolić to the position of president, Vučić was yet again promoted in his career, as Nikolić resigned from his position of president of the party, and that role fell onto him. Alongside this, Vučić was also appointed as the Minister of Defense for a short period. Under his mandate as minister, Serbia went on a shopping spree, purchasing weapons and equipment from the UAE and Russia, whilst also bolstering its local military-industrial development via the creation of new military factories in the country. Although his time in the ministry saw success, it was brief, as just after a year in office, Vučić resigned, claiming he wished to instead fully focus on the fight against crime and corruption. Now, at the same time as Serbia was undergoing a severe political shift, in the south of the country, its autonomous province that was engulfed by the flames of war just a decade ago, Kosovo declared independence from the country. Ever since the end of the Kosovo War in 1999, Kosovo had been governed as an extremely autonomous international protectorate, technically as a part of Serbia. For years, the new Serbian government and the newly established Kosovar government, under the mediation of the EU and the United States, had been conducting so-called normalization talks with the aim of Kosovo either reintegrating into Serbia, as Serbia wished, or seceding from the country and becoming independent, as Kosovo wished. Disregarding the complicated status of Kosovo in the eyes of Serbian and international law, and the shit show that is, what made the situation even more complicated was its ethnic composition. Although during the war, hundreds of thousands of Kosovo Albanians were ethnically cleansed from Kosovo after peace was established, the vast majority returned. However, many Serbs, who before the conflict in 1991 numbered at almost 10% of the province's population and were at a bit less than 200,000 inhabitants, during and after it were cleansed. Over the years, during and after the war, several pogroms organized by extremist Albanians occurred, with the largest one happening in 2004. As such, alongside discussing the return of ethnically cleansed peoples and the uncovering of mass graves, the Serbian and Kosovar governments were also discussing ways to administer Kosovo and provide security to both the Albanian and Serbian community, the latter of which mainly lived in ethnic enclaves and the north of the province. As you can imagine, compromise was rarely achieved, and the majority of negotiations went nowhere. Kosovo, to enforce its claim to sovereignty, imposed tariffs onto Serbian goods and enforced its border by sending special police forces to secure it. As a result, ethnic tensions and clashes between Serbian civilians and Kosovar authorities became a common occurrence. This started becoming a severe headache for both the parties involved as well as the West, which was facilitating these negotiations and providing security in the region. As a result, all parties insisted on the change of the negotiation delegations. In 2013, Vučić joined the negotiation table beside the Prime Minister, Ivica Dačić. Immediately upon joining, Vučić insisted on the creation of the Community of Serbian Municipalities in Kosovo and provided a template for how the community would function via governance and secure autonomy. Essentially, under Vučić's proposition, education, healthcare, judiciary, and the police would be reflected based on the ethnic composition of the municipalities, while the central Kosovar government could appoint a central commander which was nominated by the community. During the same meeting, the Kosovo delegation refused Vučić's proposition and instead chose to amend the proposition by gerrymandering the Serbian municipalities by adding 3 majority Albanian municipalities per every 4 majority Serbian. The Serbian delegation naturally refused this proposition. Following the unsuccessful meeting, Vučić called out to the EU to do something to appeal to the Albanians to accept the deal. Surprising absolutely everyone involved, the EU actually sympathized with Serbia and applied pressure onto the Albanian delegation to sign the proposed deal by Vučić, as well as the guarantee that the Serbian majority north of Kosovo would not be infringed on by the Kosovar government. The agreement signed on this day would come to be known as the Brussels Agreement. However, critics back at home saw this as Serbia legitimizing Kosovo's government and jurisdiction, by forcing the Serbs in Kosovo into a community that would be ruled over by Kosovar jurisdiction, with many arguing that Serbia de jure recognized Kosovo's independence with this agreement, while in Kosovo the Albanians saw this as the building blocks of dividing the country and the potential establishment of a new Republika Srpska. The EU and West, on the other hand, saw this as a huge step in solving the Kosovo issue, and the person that could be accredited for its success was none other than Aleksandar Vučić. Now, by this point, Vučić was well known about by the West. So much so, in fact, that during the 90s he was banned from even stepping foot inside the EU. For the majority of his career, Western powers saw him as nothing more than a right-wing grifter and potential lighter of the Balkan powder keg. However, his accomplishment in Brussels with the Serbia-Kosovo negotiations fundamentally changed their approach to the man. Now, don't get me wrong, the West was still fully aware of Vučić's nationalistic antics and his escapades in the 90s, but many saw an opportunity to leverage these antics for their own benefit. In the world of international relations, there are many concepts and theories to how countries might act under specific circumstances. Yet, one of the most interesting out of them all is the madman theory. Coming into existence during American President Richard Nixon's time in office, madman theory proposes that one way of preventing escalation of conflict is by having an irrational and volatile person at the head of state, which would deter other actors from escalating further due to a fear of an unpredictable response. This theory came to be coined due to Nixon's erratic dealings with the communist bloc. And with Vučić's promise in the world of geopolitics, the West believed it had found its Balkan madman. Furthermore, Western powers believed that by propping up Vučić and having him deal with negotiations over Kosovo and be in charge of Euro integrations, something the Serbian right wing severely opposed, the radical nationalists would be kept in check from further escalations as well. The idea being that the response from radical nationalists would be much milder if these policies were implemented by one of their own rather than from a political opponent from the other side of the political compass. As a result, from this point on, Vučić became the West's secret desired candidate for the Serbian head of state. The subsequent year, in 2014, Serbia held snap parliamentary elections under the pretenses that the current will of the people should be checked and compose the parliament according to it. By the end of the elections, SNS won over 48% of the votes and Aleksandar Vučić was appointed as prime minister. As the leader of the legislative branch, Vučić was about to change the country on a fundamental level, and oh boy, change it he did. One of Vučić's first rounds of business was to put the media back under control. You see, back in the early days of his career, Vučić learned one of the most important things a statesman could ever learn. The one who controls the media controls the masses. However, unlike in the days of his youth, where he had complete and utter control of the state's information outlets, after the fall of Milosevic, Serbia went down the path of liberalism and its media over time became increasingly independent from the government. And with his not the cleanest of track records, this could present a huge threat in his future aspirations. A major shift in Serbia's media freedom came with the passing of the 2014 Law on Public Information and Media. Now, on a surface level, this law aimed to increase media freedom and transparency in the country in an effort to align its policy more with that of the EU's. The law aimed to privatize all media outlets and houses, increase transparency in the ownership of said houses, and strengthen regulatory bodies. However, it essentially did the exact opposite of what it entailed. You see, in a post-socialist state where the majority of the population had its wealth redistributed amongst itself and became relatively impoverished, the only people that could afford to purchase ownership over the media were those with previous ties to the government. And that's exactly what happened. Virtually overnight, the vast majority of Serbia's media giants came under private ownership of a handful of government loyalists, with 75% of media being controlled by 8 media companies, majority in direct contact with the government. Secondly, as Serbia was a relatively poor country, private advertisers, the bread and butter of any media company's finances, were far and few in between. In the time period, the majority of media funding, between 25 to 40%, came from the government via subsidies and contracts. Although on paper a company could publish whatever it wanted and be skeptical of the government as it wanted, in practice, if it did so, its funding would be shut off by the ruling party, leading to the company's economic ruin. As a result, truly independent media and media that towed away from official government rhetoric was slowly weaned off from the tit of the state, while at the same time the taxpayers' milk was given to those owned by loyalist oligarchs. Hell, in some media houses like Radio Television Pančevo in 2017, the management allegedly informally told their employees that if they wished to keep their jobs, they'd have to become SNS members. A report that over the years under Vucic's time in office would become frequent throughout the country. In the same period, many TV shows and programs critical of the government would also be taken off the air. Most notable of which was Olja Bećković's political talk show on B92. International agencies like the OCSE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and BIRN, Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, took note of the degradation of Serbia's media freedom and openly criticized the Serbian government for its actions. In response, Vučić would personally retaliate by calling these organizations liars and claiming they were organizing a smear campaign against the country and him personally, whilst also accusing them of being spies and funded by the EU in an effort to destabilize Serbia. At the same time, pro-government media like TV Pink would create programming that would reinforce Vucic's claims. Further purges of media staff occurred, as was the case with Radio Television Vojvodina, where 14 editors and journalists were either removed or demoted from their positions, whilst being replaced with SNS loyalists. Attacks on journalists also increased, almost doubling in 2014 from what they were in 2011, with 20 journalists being attacked that year and 34 being attacked the subsequent year, while only 10 out of these 34 incidents were prosecuted and only 2 solved. Clearly, these were huge violations of European values and severe infractions on media freedom in the country. However, instead of the EU doing something about this, the West collectively turned a blind eye towards Vučić and the worsening state of media freedom in the country, as again, they saw him as a powerful regional ally. If he had Serbia under control and they had him on their side, stability in the Balkans could be guaranteed. Hence, instead of any repercussions for transgressions against democracy, the EU furthered Serbia's progress in its accession to the Union, further legitimizing Vučić and his actions. With the beginning of 2017, Serbia was holding its elections yet again. In a move similar to what he had done back in 2008, backstabbing Šešelj, Vučić backstabbed Nikolić, deciding to run for president on behalf of the Serbian Progressive Party. In the first round, he was able to secure over 55% of the vote, while in the second round, 56%, with the runner-up, Saša Janković, only amounting 16.63%. However, Vučić's victory seemed extremely fishy. Immediately after the announcement of the results, many independent media started reporting alleged electoral fraud. Soon after, the OSCE came out with an official report as well. According to them, Vučić and SNS as a whole had significantly more airtime and coverage on the vast majority of media outlets, with Vučić being showcased 10 times as much as all other candidates combined together. Furthermore, in the report, the OSCE accused the current Serbian government of misappropriating tax funds by utilizing them in Vučić's presidential campaign. Despite this, the results locally and internationally were accepted as legitimate, and Vučić was inaugurated later the same year. By this point, Vučić re-established a strong grip over the nation's media. He utilized it to win elections and played around with SNS's influence in other industries, mustering higher membership in the party by dangling people's jobs in front of them and requiring people to be party loyalists if they wish to progress further in their careers, similarly to how the Ottoman Empire utilized Islam against the Serbs a couple of centuries ago. But there was still loads more work to be done. To secure full control over the state, taking hold of the media was a good start. But to move on to the next level, Vučić needed to build himself a cult of personality, a tried and tested method from any autocrat's textbook of securing ultimate power. Following Vučić's ascension to presidency, a slew of interviews, speeches, and overall programming that would present the president in a positive light started seeing the light of day. Constantly, Serbs were bombarded with messages about how the president works 12 and sometimes even 19 hours in a day for them, how he is under tremendous pressure but keeps fighting for his citizens, and how he is beloved and esteemed by 1 gazillion people in China. Hell, he even made a video speaking Chinese to show gratitude to the wonderful Chinese people and their president. Xi Jinping Jusi Minyendi Fanven Serbia. Of course, the programming showcased wasn't all about him. A lot of it also consisted of Vučić boasting about Serbia's industrial and economic development. How he and his party were opening hundreds of new factories, building new highways, erecting new luxury skyscrapers, and many other things. Also, did I say it wasn't about him? Well, I lied, it was. Any project that was mentioned in any capacity also had to have Vučić linked to it in some way or form. Because if it weren't for Vučić, Serbia would never build anything of the sort. And in a blink of an eye, his plan worked. Amongst the Serbian boomers who had only recently moved up in class from rural peasants to industrial urbanites, and who weren't known for their media and technological literacy, Vučić became a household name, similar to that of the late Yugoslav dictator Tito and even Milosevic. Vučić in their eyes was the new benevolent great leader who was there to deliver them from misery, and only he was working for them, while the opposition and his naysayers were collaborating against them and the country with the evil West. In a matter that seems quite effortless, Vučić created a loyal voter base that trusted his every word, whilst also enforcing their loyalty by limiting their exposure to opposing thought. At the same time, he utilized his vast network of media to delegitimize and antagonize his critics, further cementing his power. And to really sweeten the deal, he'd regularly promise pension increases to showcase how he's really the man of the people, even though they only seldom went above the inflation rate. But as is the case with any regime that aims to control the masses via the media, there were those that were skeptical of the government narrative and could see through the charade Vučić was putting on. And that still represented a threat to the Progressive Party and Vučić's hold over the country. But worry not, he also had a plan to pacify them as well. Remember the strategy Vučić implemented to take control of the country's media? Well, after he became president, he applied the same to other industries in the country. Via subsidies and favoritism, businesses owned by SNS loyalists would receive tremendous benefits. But in return, he'd need those businesses to further increase his power. As such, many owners and managers from government and private companies required their employees to either become an SNS party member or vote for SNS at the polls if they wished to keep their job. In the elections after 2017, it became a common occurrence that employers would require you to go to the ballot box and take a picture of your ID with the SNS candidate box ticked. The party under Vučić also weaponized employment as a whole. Serbia historically has suffered from high unemployment and inflation. In a period between 2015, it wasn't uncommon for the unemployment rate to go over 20%, while under the SNS government it varied around 10%. Paired with the fact that those lucky enough to get a job also had to deal with low wages due to Serbia's economic lackings, meant that very few people didn't suffer from financial problems. As SNS quickly came to control the vast majority of both private and public enterprises, they also controlled employment in the country. Since 2017, it became common that businesses would hire people based on party affiliation, and many had to reluctantly join SNS to obtain any sort of employment, which only further increased the party's power and influence. However, it wasn't enough only for one to become a party member to get a job. More often than not, you also had to be active within the party. A popular activity for party members became spreading pro-government propaganda online. Although Vučić had full control of the media within the state, he could not control the ultimate catalog of information: the internet. In an effort to spread his tentacles and influence his countrymen even online, SNS, similarly to how Russia formed internet troll farms, formed troll farms of their own. If you look at any government functionary's social media profile, you will find a plethora of comments spamming the same 2-3 emojis and commenting generic messages of praise. Furthermore, if you browse through the comments of any content that is skeptical of the government, you'll find again numerous comments smearing the content that are all very similar in nature and talking points. In 2020, on Twitter alone, over 8,500 accounts were suspended that were promoting SNS and Vučić. Meanwhile, in 2022, Facebook suspended over 5,000 accounts. Although there are proper bots amongst these numbers, a great number of these accounts are run by regular people who are given talking points to spread online as a way to go up in the party. Anecdotally speaking, personally, I have several friends who found their friends' and families' members' personal accounts commenting this type of stuff. Other tasks party members are made to do is spam call people into convincing them to vote for the party, deliver presents such as flour, oil, coffee, chocolates, and other household items to the elderly, a demographic known to have severe financial struggles due to the low pensions in the country, importing voters from Republika Srpska into Serbia for the elections, and straight up just paying people to vote for them. Thus, utilizing the poor economic situation of the country, Vučić and SNS were able to pacify even their naysayers by creating a system which indirectly forced one to be with them or face hardship. With full control of the media and a loyal voter base, As president, Vučić could go on to the next step any autocratic leader does with their country: profit from it via the good old ways of money laundering and corruption. One of the first projects that aimed to exploit the state's finances for their personal wealth was the Savamala project. Now, Savamala used to be an old central neighborhood on the bank of the Sava River in Belgrade. In 2016, during the night, 3 excavators came and demolished 12 buildings. 30 masked individuals then proceeded to harass, physically assault, bind, and confiscate phones of citizens who were recording the event, all the while the police refused to intervene. A month later, it was confirmed government functionaries were behind this attack, but no one was convicted nor stood trial. The neighborhood was demolished as Belgrade waterfront, a plethora of luxurious high-rise condos, was announced to be built on the location. At first glance, this seemed like a great investment for an Eastern European country in development, with the project being presented as such to the public. However, upon further investigation, it was anything but. First and foremost, the main company in charge of developing the project is Eagle Hills, a United Arab Emirati company whose funding in large part came from the Serbian state's budget. Although Eagle Hills has also dedicated a good chunk of change of their own capital in the development, the amount the Serbian government allocated to the project has not been published, nor has the information been made publicly available. Secondly, the apartments, as I said previously, were envisioned to be of a luxurious kind, mainly catering to the Serbian upper class. Now, according to the Statistical Office of Serbia, the average monthly salary in the country after tax is 860 euros, which makes it one of the poorest countries in Europe. In Belgrade, the average price for a property in the city center is around 3,000 euros per square meter, while further away prices drop to 2,000. The cheapest properties in Belgrade waterfront go for almost 5,000 euros per meter squared, while others have reached the price of beyond 9,000, which on its own is way beyond market price. However, things get even worse once you examine the real estate market some more. Serbia, according to the latest census, has a population of 6.8 million. However, there are over 1.1 million dormant apartments and houses across the country, which makes supply much larger than demand. In economics, when this is the case, that would mean that the prices for a product would go down. Yet in Serbia, the price of real estate has just kept going up, which makes the situation completely illogical and makes Belgrade waterfront seem like a preposterous investment. However, the answer to why it is being built is quite obvious: money laundering. In the Balkans as a whole, and not just in Serbia, the main way of laundering money is done via real estate. Many countries in the region have lax laws regarding purchasing properties where, when purchasing such an asset, the origin of the money does not have to be disclosed. New construction projects are ideal for this type of action, as the buyer can purchase an overvalued property via cash from wherever he obtained it, and make the money practically legal overnight. According to the data from the country's anti-money laundering agency, in 2020, around 86% of transactions in the Serbian real estate market were made in cash, and the majority of money laundering cases are done via real estate. As such, due to the lack of transparency in the project, the extremely overvalued prices of the properties, many have started to speculate that Belgrade waterfront was nothing less than a money laundering scheme conducted by the Serbian government via the use of offshore companies and accounts mainly located in the UAE. Supporting this theory are cases where high-ranking SNS members were caught operating within the illegal drug trade. The most notable of the cases was the infamous Jovanjica case. The Jovanjica company, owned by Predrag Koluvija, was reputed for producing organic food until a police raid uncovered it as a large-scale marijuana farm. Koluvija, connected to the Serbian Progressive Party, was accused of leading a criminal group cultivating and selling marijuana with assistance from police officers and intelligence agents. According to KRIK, a crime and corruption reporting network, Koluvija was supported by the police and state security services, who would run checks on potential farm hires, provide him with fake police badges, fake visas, identify him as a police officer, and provide him with police license plates. Koluvija has also alleged that the head of Belgrade's police anti-drug department and the department's operations and prosecutor were also involved in the farm's dealings and told him to accuse Vucic's brother of all the crimes. Subsequently to the discovery, the 2 officers responsible for the discovery of the farm were removed from their post, and became targets for the Serbian state-controlled media, while the head of the department and prosecutor were put on a different post, hampering the investigation and prosecution. Additionally, many local and international observers have also started to ring the alarm bells of the Serbian government being involved with organized crime and having ties to the mob. One of the indicators has been the parallel rise of the infamous Janjičari mafia syndicate with the rise of the current ruling SNS party. Since 2013, the Janjičari has grown tremendously in power and influence, with reports showing they have become connected to numerous state officials such as high-ranking police officials and the General Secretary of SNS. In 2017, during Vucic's inauguration, several members attended the ceremony. Since Vučić came to office, his eldest son, Danilo, has also been photographed on numerous occasions with the group's members. In addition to this, a New York Times article detailed alleged connections between President Vučić and organized crime in Serbia, particularly with Janjičari's gang leader, Veljko Belivuk. The report included court transcripts where Belivuk claimed to have met Vučić and provided services like intimidating political rivals. In typical fashion, Vučić dismissed these allegations as lies, asserting the article was orchestrated by the CIA to send him a message. Although Vučić has publicly declared a war against organized crime and corruption, many have been skeptical of the results of this action due to the previously mentioned incidents and ties between SNS and organized crime syndicates. As you can imagine, the Serbian people aren't blind nor deaf, and many start to see the deterioration of their already fickle state under the rule of Vučić and SNS. General dissatisfaction in living standards, rising corruption, lack of progress in normalizing relations with Kosovo, lack of media and press freedom start to dramatically rise. And so, by 2018, voices critical of the government and their actions became ever so louder. This, of course, presented a threat to Vučić and the ruling party, who continued playing by their textbook and went on to utilize the media to antagonize and silence their critics. But as the people became ever more critical of the status quo narrative, this tactic became less and less effective. As such, the government needed to take more drastic measures to quiet down the grumbles from the people. One such measure was when in the same year, Borko Stefanović, an oppositionary MP, was assaulted by several masked alleged SNS members via a metal bar. During the attack, Borko had a wound inflicted upon his head and started to bleed all over his clothes. Subsequently to the attack, he presented his bloody shirt in parliament and condemned the alleged government attackers. This event sparked mass outrage across the country under the name of Stop Bloody Shirts, whose aim was to protest the use of violence against political oppositionaries and journalists. Thousands hit the streets of Belgrade to make their voices heard. However, instead of taking these concerns seriously, Vučić went on TV and proclaimed he'll never grant any demands even if 5 million people gathered and marched. Feeling that the president had poured salt all over their wounds, the Stop Bloody Shirts protest rebranded to 1 out of 5 million, which encompassed a much larger number of people, from students, the working class, and oppositionary parties from all sides of the political compass. Every Saturday for 15 months, people would walk down the streets of Belgrade asking for a stop against political violence and for the institutions to do their jobs, as well as for Vučić and other functionaries to step down. The protest only stopped when martial law was declared during COVID, which many suspect was only put in place as a way to put the protesters to a halt rather than as a genuine anti-pandemic measure. Nevertheless, during the 15 months of protests, SNS, instead of doing anything to satisfy the protesters, decided to organize counter-protests all across Serbia. These protests were artificially organized, with the party paying other party members small amounts of money, giving them sandwiches, and even on some occasions, if a higher-up member was a business owner, forcing his employees to attend if they wished to keep their job. SNS members were then transported to various cities via buses organized by the party, in events that resembled more Ceausescu's last speech rather than genuine protests. As such, in Serbia, many gave SNS voters the nickname sandwichers. After the pandemic, life in Serbia resumed as usual. Protests went down in number and the government continued its regular activities, with institutions further degrading. However, on November 1st, 2024, everything was about to change with one train station.